There are millions of video games in this world, so how can you make your game stand out? You can have some of the most fun gameplay, the most mind-blowing physics, the most beautiful graphics, the most amazing soundtrack, the most heart-wrenching stories, and you can utilize the medium of video games to give the players an experience they couldn't have in any other medium. Or just make your game yellow. Colored cartridges, a foolproof way to make your game stand out. Nothing stands out in a sea of gray or black like a little splash of color. It's one of my favorite things about cartridges. Yeah, take that, discs. So I want to go chronologically, which would mean we should start with the Atari 2600, but I don't really know if there are any. There never really was a consistent cartridge design, I imagine because this was the first video game console ever, so they were figuring stuff out. There could well be some Atari colored cartridges, but I couldn't find anything worth talking about. Starting off with a bang, we have the Famicom. There was no standardized color for Famicom cartridges, so every single game could be whatever color they wanted, from yellow to red to black, you name it. My favorite is Kirby Pink. You could make a rainbow with all these games. The Famicom disk system would later come out, and while technically not cartridges, these floppy disks are cartridge-alike. Most of the disks were a yellow color, but you can find a few that are blue. I can't really find a consistent reason why they're blue, but, you know, at least they look cool. There was a golden disc given for golf, given away in a contest, whoever could get the highest score. If you want to collect one, good luck finding it. While Japan had all these fun colors, America was much more restricted. Nearly every NES game was the same gray color, but there was one game special enough to get its own cartridge. The Legend of Zelda NES cartridge was given a gold coating. Zelda was a game set in a fantasy world with dungeons and monsters, so giving it a shiny golden cartridge just made it feel all the more magical. Zelda became so tied to its golden cartridge that a sequel would be also given the same coloration. Since then, gold has become the Legend of Zelda series' most prominent color, with many handhelds also colored gold. Another golden cartridge is the Nintendo World Championship cartridges. For those who do not know, Nintendo World Championship was a competition about completing specific small challenges in various NES games as quickly as possible. The cartridges for these games were made specifically for the competition and weren't sold anywhere. Although some people have gotten their hands on them, so if you're committing to having all the gold NES cartridges, you might want to start saving up. As I was recording this, they made a new NES Championships game for the Switch, and the physical version has a fake gold NES cartridge. So that's neat. If we're including unofficial cartridges, there's a lot of bootleg cartridges in black. The Super Nintendo had 3 colored cartridges. Killer Instinct, a fighting game made by Rare, was given a black cartridge, I suppose because the game was hyped up to be very hardcore and a mature game for the system. Speaking of 90s edginess, Doom was one of the most violent video games at the time it was released. For a game about shooting demons' heads off, it needed more than just a standard gray cartridge. Doom's Super Nintendo cartridge was blood red, which is so sick. There was another red cartridge in the form of Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. The reason for this, I assume, was that there were already a few Spider-Man games on the Super Nintendo, so they gave it a red cartridge to help it stand out. Or just, you know, Carnage is red. If you ask me, Super Nintendo Doom is much cooler than Maximum Carnage, so whenever I'm shopping and see a red cartridge, I always get excited thinking I finally found Doom, but alas, it's just Maximum Carnage again. Maximum Carnage would also have a red cartridge on the Genesis. That's, to my research, the only colored Genesis cartridge. Things have been relatively lax up until now, but with the Game Boy, things go crazy. There are 3 standard Game Boy cartridges. The gray ones that work on all handhelds and have no color, the translucent ones that only work on models that support color, and black ones that work on both, but have color coded in for models that support color. My condolences to all the kids with an original Game Boy confused as to why their Game Boy Color games didn't work. Whew! I had to take a night class for that. The Game Boy is home to some of the most famous colored video game cartridges, the Pokémon games. Since 5 out of the 6 Game Boy Pokémon games are named after colors, their American and PAL cartridges were all matching with the colors of their titles. Even Pokémon Crystal got a sparkling, translucent light blue cartridge. Pokemon Pinball had a unique cartridge that supported Rumble, colored black. The Donkey Kong Land trilogy of games comes in yellow cartridges to match the DK crew's favorite food. Kirby Tilt and Tumble was a game about moving your Game Boy to roll Kirby down obstacle courses. The motion controls required a special cartridge, and since it was a unique mold, they made it pink to match our favorite puffball. Japan may have had to skip out on colored cartridges for the Pokemon games, but they did get their own regional colored cartridges. 4 Tamagotchi games, all with special colors. 1 pink, 1 white, 1 yellow, and 1 funky long turquoise one. And lastly, there's the Game Boy camera. The cameras came in red, yellow, blue, green, atomic purple, and an extremely rare golden version. There's so many special Game Boy cartridges that it's possible I may have missed a few, but I think I got all the big ones. If you thought that was a lot of colors, get loaded the N64. While the PlayStation and Sega Saturn brought discs mainstream, the N64 was still rocking cartridges, so I hope these colors were worth it. The most common alternate color was black, with 20 cartridges, with games ranging from Rainbow Six to Scooby-Doo. Spider-Man swings back with one of the 6 red cartridges for the system. There's 5 green and 5 blue, 3 yellow, one of which Donkey Kong again, and just like the NES, the N64 got 2 Zelda titles, both of which were given gold cartridges. Allegedly, the reason Ocarina of Time got a gold cartridge was due to a misunderstanding by, at the time, Nintendo of America chairman Howard Lincoln. He was asked if the game would have a gold cartridge, but mistook the question as, would the game go gold, as in if the game would sell well. He said yes, but instead of just explaining the miscommunication, he just gave Ocarina of Time a gold cartridge. The only non-Zelda gold cartridge for the N64 was Pokemon Stadium 2. The reason for the gold cartridge is that the game was based off Pokemon Gold and Silver. So after the N64 comes the GameCube. Okay, so home consoles stopped using cartridges for a while, but we still have handhelds. The Pokemon games returned with colored cartridges, now even in Japan. The GBA had ports of NES games called the Classic NES series. These cartridges were colored the same shade of gray as NES games. In Japan, these cartridges were colored the colors of the Japanese version of the NES, the Famicom, or colored the same shade of yellow as Famicom Disk System discs. There are Game Boy Advance cartridges, instead of housing games, house movies, titled GBA video cartridges. The video cartridges are a lighter gray, and have the setback of not working on the GameCube's Game Boy player. The Japanese version of Mega Man Battle Network 4 had special editions with red or blue cartridges, and Mega Man Battle Network 5 has a rare teal variant. Yoshi Topsy Turvy and WarioWare Twisted had special cartridges to add tilt controls, so the cartridges were unique molds colored green and transparent blue, respectively. The game Drill Dozer also had a unique cartridge to add rumble with a reddish-brown coloration. You might remember that early versions of the DS had a GBA cartridge slot, so a handful of games used this port for accessories. The DS game Metroid Prime Pinball came along with a black GBA cartridge meant to give the game rumble, along with 49 other games. There are a lot of other accessories compatible with the DS's GBA slot, but I wouldn't really call them GBA cartridges. Sadly, this seems to be where our colored cartridge journey ends. After the Game Boy Advance, game cartridges got too small to really invest in alternate colors. I mean, there is Pokemon Soul Silver and Heart Gold. They have a slightly darker gray cartridge, but I don't really think that counts. I really love these colored cartridges. Without these, people would care even less about Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. It was always a fun way to show that the developers and distributors really cared and wanted to make their own games special. Unfortunately, it's a dead art, with discs being literally whatever color they want. I guess the legacy lives on with special colored game boxes, but it's just not the same, man. I love these little games that were brave enough to be themselves. I should really collect more of these. Let's see how much they cost.